received by the state from the Federal CARES Act Fund. And as was also mentioned, $100 million of those funds have been targeted for distribution to these Alabama small businesses. The good thing, one of the good things, there are a number of them about this program, but there's no cost to apply or to receive these funds. There's an application period that will start tomorrow. We'll run for 10 days, beginning at noon tomorrow. And we hope we have streamlined the entire application process and made it very clear what the eligibility requirements are, which we'll talk about in detail. But there is a place you go to apply. There are some eligibility criteria. There are some limits on the money, and we will talk about those in particular. So with that, I understand there are some questions, and we'll get right into them. But I should probably, Kelley, I'm not sure if I left anything else off that I should have said at the introduction, but please chime in if I did.
Okay,
And
you should be able
as well.
to. There you go.
You're still muted, I think, Kelley.
That should fix
There you
it.
go.
How about that? There we go.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm manipulating several screens here, so thank you for your patience. No, Curtis, I think you covered it all. I think one of the most important things for us at the Department of Revenue is this is obviously an initiative of Governor Kay Ivey, and we are very pleased that she's entrusted us with this. We are trying to help implement this as best we can. And as Curtis mentioned, we put a lot of information out there on the website that answers significant portions of the questions that we think people will have. So please take advantage of that, even if you're participating today in this webinar. And thank you for participating. We're very excited about this program.
All right, wonderful. So we'll hop into some of the questions if we want to. Let's see. Let's go for Q&A. Those of us that have joined us via Facebook Live, please feel free to put your questions in the comments. Okay, so far I just see sharing. I know you guys are burning with questions, but while you come up with your question, one of the hot topics, Kelley and Mr. Curtis, has been what about those folks that received the PPP or either the EIDL or both? And then we also saw that there was a caveat for if you also received pandemic unemployment assistance. So for that group of small business owners, how should we calculate those expenses? What should we be putting on our application?
Curtis, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, please.
Yes. So the maximum grant amount is $15,000, obviously. And the way the application process works, or let me go back one step from that. The funds from this program cannot be used to pay expenses that you have been reimbursed for or expect to be reimbursed for from those federal programs you identified, PPP, the emergency disaster loans, and the PUA. Okay. You don't have to calculate that outside of the application process. So within the application process, it's going to ask you for your total business disruption expenses to date through the application date. Okay. And that's going to be everything. So you use that number of all those expenses that you identified. Then it's going to ask you about the amount of PPP or EIDL or PUA that you have received or expect to receive, and that would include those advances you and I discussed yesterday.
Yes.
And then the system will then subtract that number of that federal assistance from the total amount of expenses that you're claiming, and that will be the maximum amount of expenses you can be reimbursed for through this grant program, up to that $15,000 max. Does that help?
It does. We had some a specific question from Emily with SBDC, and I also have a specific question too that I think will maybe dive deeper into. So Company A received, let's say, $250,000 for the PPP, which we know for the most part, the highest percentage is allocated towards payroll and the remaining percentage towards a rental, a commercial lease. Is it out of the question, again, that company is able to apply because they received $250,000 in PPP? That's the first part.
No,
Okay.
it would not be, because I think, as you and I discussed yesterday as well, most of that has to go to payroll. The rest of it could go to those lease or rental payments.
Mhm.
The expenses that can be reimbursed through this program include things like utilities, mortgage interest, PPE that you've had to purchase, adaptations to your site to do curbside dining. So
Okay.
it covers a broader array of expenses. You just need to be, as we discussed, very careful. Make sure you've documented those expenses, and keep up with that documentation after the grant application process. This is federal money, and there's a possibility that the federal people will be coming behind it looking at those expenses.
That's wonderful, because even though we had talked yesterday, I was slightly wanting to dive deeper into that. And so that's why I saved it for today. So that's a very good clarification, because a lot of small business owners automatically stop reading when you see, I got the PPP. You're like, oh, I can't apply. But this clarification, everyone, has just really kind of opened that back up. If you counted yourself out because you received either of those three categories, what Kelley is saying is, you may want to reconsider. And of course, documentation is going to save the day when it comes to you saying that these expenses are what I would like for this grant to cover. So Kelley, I'm going to pop back out in a more general sense and talk about some of the administrative approaches to this. So I am a small business and I have no idea what my password is for my MAT account. Or maybe I don't even know what an MAT account is. Can we start there, on MAT and MAT kind of technical stuff?
Well, let me take that one about MAT. MAT, also My Alabama Taxes. And it is it's the official website of the Department of Revenue for interacting with taxpayers. It's a place where you can set up accounts set up an account in MAT to access your tax accounts in the department's system, whether that's individual or business income taxes, sales tax, rental tax, payroll withholding tax, all of those things. You have an account with the department if you're an ongoing business and you're filing and paying those things. You may not have a My Alabama Taxes account, though, which is a portal where you can get into our system and see your account, see what returns are filed, what balances may exist, that you have a zero balance. You can also see if we've sent you any messages or notices that you can read. So if you get a letter from the Department of Revenue, and because like some people, you just don't want to read it, you toss it and you lose it, you have a My Alabama Taxes account, you can look in and it shows you any letters we've sent you. It's a good place to stay in touch with us. It lets you know what we're thinking about you, what we've done related to you in any of your tax accounts. So if you filed a return on paper and you want to make sure that we've gotten it and loaded it, sometime after you filed it, if you go out and look, you should be able to see it in your My Alabama Taxes account. So not just for this purpose, but for any purposes of dealing with the Department of Revenue, we encourage everyone to have a My Alabama Taxes account, or MAT for short. It's just a way to stay on top of your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a question. I wanted to jump in here. So with that being the case, if I understood it correctly, when we were reading through the requirements, it said that the business owner had to actually do the application themselves. Okay, is that correct? So my question is, if the My Alabama Tax or My Alabama Taxes is normally being processed by a bookkeeper or an accountant, how does that play into this scenario? Because that's one of the things that we were beating down the doors of these business owners and saying, hey, for the PPP, you need to get somebody, you need a bookkeeper, you need an accountant, you need somebody to help you. And now they're being told that they have to do it themselves. And so could you speak to that a little bit and tell us how they would navigate that scenario?
Well, you can certainly still help them do that. The point, though, is that a CPA or a person or a business that normally files returns for certain businesses. So you have a monthly filing program where you file sales tax returns for X number of businesses. And you can file those under your own login as the preparer.
Right.
All of these applications have to be filed in the business's login. Okay? So you can certainly help them do that, but you have to do it as the business. You can't do it as the preparer.
Got it. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah,
Very
that's
helpful.
a very good clarification, especially for, again, businesses like mine where we're going into my tax and filing all these various taxes. So I appreciate that clarification. So I also wanted to pull out something that Mr. Curtis said that was very important and add a little bit onto it. So the other purpose of my Alabama tax is, of course, that business privilege tax. And so that is a very commonly missed opportunity, maybe, of tax compliance that does affect the small business community. And so one of the questions that I raised to Kelley yesterday regarding that, because I know you're burning to ask this. And so I've logged into my MAT. What if I find out, man, I owe $100 today? What should they do, Kelley? Will they be able to satisfy that $100 or whatever that amount is and still be able to apply on Thursday?
As we discussed yesterday, the best advice is to go ahead and pay that liability if you see it out there, or if you're aware of a liability that you have, because one of the requirements is being in good standing. So that would be the best practice to get that taken care of if you know about it ahead of time.
Perfect. So
Follow-up
translation, look, translation, log into your MAT account today before the Thursday at 12 noon opening time for those applications, just so you don't have any surprises. Go ahead, Reggie, sorry.
No, you're great. I was just going to ask, if that number, obviously there has been some difficult challenges. And so is that an opportunity for someone, if that number is, say, larger than $100, for them to be on some type of payment plan during the process and still be able to apply? Is that an option, or is that something that kind of is going to automatically disqualify them?
I'm going to let Curtis maybe take the last half of that. Let me step in and say something that was very important. The date that we're looking for technically of good standing and compliance is March 1, 2020, because we know some businesses potentially had some outstanding liabilities that are associated with the pandemic itself. So, and that we had been given, extensions for some of those and some other things. So we are looking at that date really, so that we don't get into the issue of businesses that received extensions or other things for payment under some of the very relief orders that we gave. I'm going to refer the second part of your question to Curtis.
Okay.
Well, and Kelley, you covered it very well. If the business was in compliance as of March 1st and something has happened because of the COVID-19 related shutdowns and expenses incurred, that won't count against the business. If a business was out of compliance prior to March 1st, as Taliba said, the best thing to do is log into your MAT account today. Take a look at your status. That's a good use of the MAT account. See where you stand. If you've got an account, say business privilege, that you didn't pay last year, it should tell you that. And then you can see what the options are. Once you do that, and if it's an amount that you cannot pay, contact us and let us know, and then we'll see what we can do. But at least you will know if you log in before the deadline, before the portal opens for application, then you may be able to see where you stand.
Okay, to that point, I do see a very relevant question. It's probably more like a one-on-one, but I do want to pose it because this does happen. I've seen it with clients. So we have from Catherine here within Zoom. Her statement is, I have an incorrect balance listed on MAT for a business privilege tax that was prior to the whole launch of the system. So, while it's specific, I think it kind of dovetails on to what Mr. Curtis was saying as it relates to if something is showing that you have a payment right or wrong, right, the recommendation is for them to go ahead and call someone today
Absolutely.
to try to get that addressed. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
If there's
and if I could,
something showing on Matt that you think is wrong, go ahead and contact us. And that's another reason for having a Matt account, because then you can kind of see where you stand all along.
and if I may dovetail on that, one of the reasons that's so important to address ahead of time is because these funds are available on a first come, first served basis until they're exhausted. And so these applications are going to be considered in the order of their receipt. If there's something out there that's going to cause what we call an auto denial, because when we check it against our system, it's showing that an eligibility requirement is not being met, you're going to lose your place in that queue. Get these issues resolved as soon as possible so you can get your application in and be, further near the front of that queue.
Very good information. We also have a question related to that from Riley. Could a solution to what we're talking about be that the grant has to be used to pay outstanding taxes?
No, the grant cannot be used to pay outstanding taxes. The law, CARES Act, specifically forbids the states from using the money that came down to the states, which is where this funding has come from, for revenue replacement.
Okay, that's a very good answer and very good question, because it makes sense when you think about it, right? So we're giving this to you and then we're actually going to receive it. Okay, very good clarification. I'm going to,
Yeah, we can take some of the questions out of the chat, out of the question box. This got a few there.
Okay, I see from Selena, what if we just put the business privilege tax check in the mail?
So that's one reason we encourage people to electronically file and electronically pay, because you get immediate credit for it. If you just put something in the mail, it probably won't show up for a few days. So if that is an amount that would otherwise disqualify you, until that's received, it will still disqualify you.
So maybe go ahead and cancel that check and pay electronically.
Yeah, and Curtis and I were just talking about, we were just talking about those electronic payment options yesterday, Curtis, if you can send people to the right place on the web.
Yeah. If you've got, once you get into your My Alabama Taxes account, if it shows a liability and you want to pay it electronically, there is a way to just click on it and you can go in and do our direct pay option or our credit card payment option. And those will happen immediately and go ahead and post. And
perfect.
I mean the same day.
Perfect. Perfect.
Gregory has a very good question. But I had this on my list and I want to make sure that we cover it too. And I'm going to get to Gregory's question. And that is, what if I don't know what my password is? I've lost it. How do I figure this out? And the reason why this is a relevant question for those of us that are in MAT all the time, and Kelley and I talked about this yesterday, the traditional registration for an MAT account does involve you actually getting an access code in the mail, right? So some of the questions that you might have for those of us who have been in MAT, love to hate it, right? You're thinking, oh, wait, how do I get that access code? So Kelley, would you like to just point out to everyone it's a two-part question. One, if they've lost their password, they have no idea what it is, what should they do? And then two, could you please talk about the new process specifically designated for this Revive Alabama grant opportunity on getting a new account or getting a account?
I can, and the way I'd like to start that out, please, is I want to talk about how important security is for our MAT system. We don't want anyone to be able to take your business name, your business FEIN, or your social security number and be able to come in and create a MAT account, because once they do, they have access to all your information. So that's why we take great care in the process you were talking about how we provide that login information. We're very sensitive to the short time period that we were having to deal with the Revive Alabama grants. So a couple of things. If you had a MAT account and you just can't find your login information, you can call or email, and I actually encourage people to email the tax policy area, which is my area. I'll give you that phone number and email address right now, but it's probably just best if you go out and look at our FAQs. The phone number is 242-0479. The email address is taxpolicy altogether at revenue.alabamaspelledout.gov.
And Reggie's putting that into the chat right now.
Perfect.
And that area code is 334 for that.
Yes.
phone number as well.
Thank you, Curtis.
And just to make sure I have it correctly, it's 334-242-0479.
Yes.
Correct.
And now I'm questioning myself. Hey, Curtis, but you might click on through and make sure I gave him the right number, but I'm very confident that it is. I'd be embarrassed if it's not.
334-242-0479.
I did it, yay. All right, so, but here's the thing. Probably the fastest thing you can do, because we've established this process where you can do a fillable PDF MAT application just for this Revive Alabama grant program. Again, in the FAQs, there's a direct link to that fillable PDF. There's also, if you go to the login page for the MAT portal, if you look over to the right for business resources, you can, it's in that menu of things to look at, which is the MAT application for an RASB, a Revive Alabama grant, small business grant. So that, you'll submit that, and you have to submit some specific documentation along with that to our tax policy email. If you are a sole proprietorship or an independent contractor, you're going to need to upload an image of your driver's license with that. And again, this is to make sure that somebody else is not getting into your tax information. But if you need to do that, go ahead and get that done, get it uploaded, get it sent to tax policy. We are trying to handle those applications as quickly as possible. And the sooner we get it, the sooner we can work through it. If it's really just that you don't remember your login information, call that number or email us. And if there is an email address on file with that MAT account, we can send that logon information to that email address. We're not going to send it to a different one. Curtis, can you add on to that?
Yeah, just to recap. So if you do not have a My Alabama Taxes account and want to set one up, there's a procedure, an expedited procedure for setting one up now. And I encourage you, if you're going to do that, do it today. You don't wait till noon tomorrow. There's a process for doing it, a fillable PDF. There's some documentation you have to provide because we want to ensure that the person setting up the account is the real person who owns the account. But once you do that, then your account should be up and active when the time comes. If, on the other hand, you already have a My Alabama Taxes account and you just want to get your login credentials, there's a way to do that too. Now, you've got to satisfy us that you're the real person, and we will send the information to an email address we already have on file. So you can't call up and say, change the email address and get the credentials sent to it, because we don't want someone who's not authorized to do that.
And Curtis, about submitting that application, we've had hundreds of applications so far. We are processing those as quickly as possible. If all the documentation is included and we can pretty much verify it just by reviewing that documentation, it is a pretty quick process. Someone will reach out to you if there's additional documentation that's needed. They will also reach out directly to the person submitting the application regarding the creation of the MAT account if that application is being approved. So you will hear from somebody one way or the other.
Okay. So I want to go to Gregory's question, because we briefly mentioned it, but I want to drill into it a little bit more, because there was definitely a great opportunity for independent contractors, our Schedule C filers, to participate in the PPP program. So I want to highlight whether or not that is going to be the case with Revive Alabama. So Gregory's question is, will a person who is an independent contractor be able to apply, or is it just if you have an actual entity? So again, if he's a Schedule C filer, what would those people need to be able to do?
Curtis, you want to take that one?
Yes, well, You are certainly eligible if you are a Schedule C filer, even if you don't have a separate business entity. And if you file your taxes using Schedule C on your individual income tax return, then that's a record of your business having existed and having filed. So yes, you are eligible to the same extent that a corporate entity would be eligible.
Wonderful. Very good question. Very good information. Kelley, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just remember, again, those folks may have gotten PUA.
Right.
So
Right.
a reminder about how those two things work together.
Very good.
You can't get a grant for funds for any of your self-employed wages that were covered by a PPP loan or are expected to be covered by one.
Okay. So that's a very good clarification. So I'm going to.
I'm sorry, PUA. I said PPP.
I know what you
PUA.
Yep.
Sorry.
I'm going to clarify that. So for independent contractors, 1099 independent contractors, or even LLCs that are filing a Schedule C. So you are eligible to apply. Where we talked about this at the top of the webinar about if you had received PPP, PUA, or the EIDL, you still are going to make sure that the expenses you're including in this application haven't already been covered by those things. So for example, self-employment wages, if you receive the PPP as a Schedule C filer, if that covered, say, March and April, the PPP that you received, then you would be putting in the expenses or your self-employment wages for after April, May, June, right, Kelley?
Well, actually, and I'll just jump in, Kelley.
Okay.
You show your total incurred expenses during the period. So for the entire period related to COVID-19, if you've incurred, and I'll just throw out an example, if you've incurred $30,000 of eligible expenses and you've already been reimbursed for $20,000, then you've got a net $10,000 that's eligible. But you show both of those numbers in the application. So you show the $30,000 gross, the reimbursement you've already received, and that shows the net amount that's still unreimbursed.
Okay. And so for the Schedule C filer, if that expense is as it was with PPP, that amount was divided to be income for the Schedule C filer, then what I was saying is, so there's still $10,000 remaining that you have. It just would be the cap that you would be able to apply for.
Yeah, but you don't have to
example.
split it out. You don't have to say, well, I've already applied for March and April, I think was your example. Now I'm going to apply for May forward. You show the whole amount and then you show the reimbursement.
Got it.
Works out to the same net amount.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go through some more of the questions. And Catherine, I see your question. Reggie, you can go ahead. I see your question. Yeah. But yes, I would recommend you do that and just get a refund. Go ahead.
Yeah. So no, I was just a couple of people are chiming in right here before we transition. And since it's kind of fresh, it's one individual said, what if you were approved, but did not receive the PPP or the EIDL? How do we calculate that? So that would be the first question. If you say you have an approval, but you hadn't got the funds yet.
I can address that. If you've been approved, that you are therefore expecting to receive those funds.
Okay.
So it's funds that have been received or are expected to be received. So you would include those in what you're reporting as being received.
Perfect. Thank you. And then to clarify the equation, because I was going to ask this question again. So it's the total incurred business disruption expense minus federal assistance, PPP, PUA, EIDL equals the maximum amount reimbursed. Is that correct? Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Up to the overall maximum for this.
Yes.
That's correct. Up to the 15,000. So yes. It's how much you've incurred for eligible expense. And do that rundown one more time for those that may have not been on here in the beginning of those eligible expenses, since we're on this topic.
Okay, eligible expenses are not limited to, but they include, mortgage interest,
rent.
sorry, my phone was ringing. Please continue, Kelley.
Mortgage interest, rent, utilities, PPE, such as masks, those kinds of things. That would also include expenses you've had to take, you've incurred to achieve social distancing, like the plexiglass that you put up, or improvements for curbside service, for dining, for restaurants, those kinds of expenses.
And so that could be,
it does not include lost sales. It's very, very
Okay.
important.
okay. And so Kelley, for your example, that could actually be if, just to kind of really drive this home, if you're a restaurant and you went to your point of sale service provider and you wanted to get a wireless device that you can go outside and take purchases, that would be an expense. Is that correct?
So a combination for curbside dining, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Saliba, let's jump into this Q&A. We got about 7 of them right now, so let's see what they have for us.
So I gotta be a little bit of a devil's advocate a little bit on that clarification.
Go ahead.
because we did kind of say, you know, for the folks that got the larger PPP loans, like say for example, Company A we talked about earlier, received $250,000.
Okay.
Right. So if we went with that equation, you know, then $250,000 automatically is over $15,000. So I think we do need that. While that equation does work, if there is also an eligibility for businesses who received a larger PPP to still apply, then I want to make sure that we have that clarification again. You know, because that's a gray area there that we're discovering in this webinar that we need to make sure we pull out of there.
And it's funny to leave it because I was thinking about that a while ago when the question that include the April, June dates came up, and my mind was on the other question. So I think the clarification is that for this application, you'll put the total business disruption expenses you're requesting be reimbursed. I probably said it the wrong way. And the amount, if any, of federal funds that were also received to reimburse for those expenses that you're asking to be there. Does that help?
It does.
And that fixes that issue. Curtis, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, just that, say for instance, 250,000 of previously reimbursed expenses. The limit in this program isn't the amount of expenses, it's the size of the business. So if you're talking about a business with 19 or fewer employees,
that's right,
5 million in revenues, then they qualify based on size. The amount of the expenses isn't a limit. So
absolutely.
If the expenses is 250,000, they've already gotten reimbursed 230,000. Then their unreimbursed business interruption expenses are still 20,000. And of course, the limit for this program for reimbursement is 15,000. 15.
Yeah. And I think what we're trying to clarify is that somebody might have gotten a PPP loan that covered that all of their payroll expenses, but for this application, what they're trying to cover are things like rent and utilities,
right?
PPE. So yes, I think the clarification I gave you works for that.
Yes, it does. It does, because you do have, I'm thinking of a Birmingham-based business right now that we got PPP funds for, and they are less than 19, you know, individuals. However, they did qualify for a sizable PPP loan. And so, you know, I wanted to pull that group of business owners out because that's very relevant for your smaller business who does have a higher payroll expense to see if this particularly allowed for them to apply. So that's very good. Okay. So I'll go to the Q&As, Reggie. I know you. All right. So we have a question from Carrie Schrader. Hi, Carrie. So 2019 will be the first year we filed taxes in Alabama, and we have extended that task until October 15th because today is tax day, right, everybody?
Today is tax day.
And my clients are texting me now, like, why are you on the webinar and not doing my taxes? But anyway, so to continue with Carrie's question, we are all up to date with the Birmingham business license. Are we still eligible to apply for funds? So just to repeat that, because I interjected my comedic relief. 2019 will be the first year we filed taxes in Alabama, and we have filed an extension for October 15th. we are up to date with the Birmingham business license, are we still eligible to apply for funds?
So for those businesses that began operations after January 1st of 2019, yes, they will not have been required to file a tax return previously.
Okay.
If they have not yet filed the 2019 and they request an extension, which is permissible, then they don't have to file that return before they apply. They do have to set up a My Alabama Taxes account, and in order to set up a My Alabama Taxes account, they have to give us evidence that they were really in business. And if they've got their business licenses that they already set up, then they should be fine.
Perfect
So
question.
just for that's perfect. So just for clarification, so if you're a startup and you started your business in January, you could have incurred some expenses and been in good standing as of March and still be eligible to apply. Is that correct?
Yes, the cutoff date is March 1st of 2020. So if you were in business and in good standing as of that date, and you can apply for a MAT account showing evidence of being in business, i.e. a business license, business bank account, business rental agreement, some things like that, then you will be allowed to set up a My Alabama Taxes account. And the fact that you haven't yet filed an income tax return for 2019 or 2020 will not bar you from that.
Outstanding.
And if I may, this goes back to that security question as well. One of the reasons we're going to ask you for so much documentation, if you are a business that's saying you started in maybe 19 and haven't filed anything yet, but we don't want other people to be able to use your name or your information. So we'll be substantiating all of that just to make sure that you as a business owner don't have someone else use your information to get a MAT account or to get one of these grants.
Or more importantly, not let someone do it that you permit to do it, someone doing it because they've stolen your ID and and you don't even know that they have done it, and they get a grant without you even knowing it. So yes, you do have to provide some documentation that you've come into business since January 1st of 2019.
All right, so we have another great question. We've kind of touched around it, but let's specifically address the documentation needed. So we know there will be within MAT, which gives us sort of that historical data if we have an account created, but we talked about that PDF document, a couple other things. So what documents, particularly as it relates to expenses and other things, are going to be great for them to have to submit with their Revive Alabama application?
Curtis, if I may take this, do you want to take it?
No, go ahead and then I'll chime in.
Yeah. One of the things that you and I discussed yesterday, Taliba, that emphasized, number one, it's important that you have all of your documentation ahead of time, look through it, have it all pulled together, and keep those records going forward. As a part of the application process, the initial application, there will not be uploads of those kinds of records. What we will be doing during that application process is there's going to be an auto check against records in for the other eligibility requirements, not the expenses, against the other eligibility requirements. But that information is essentially self-certifying during the application process. But you must keep your records for future reference. Curtis, did you have any?
Yeah, and just to add, we're talking about two types of documentation here.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is documentation of your existence as a business. If you just recently started business, then a couple of the things I mentioned, like a business license or business bank account, or some of those documents, registration with the Secretary of State, et cetera, that you generated, those items are evidence of existence.
Right.
Other question that Taliba mentioned about documentation of your expenses, those fall within the normal required documentation for business expenses. If you pay bills, you need to keep your records and your expenses and your receipts and other documentation. And those things don't have to be submitted as part of this application, but they should be maintained for normal business documentation anyway. Plus, it was mentioned earlier that because this is federal money, there may be some federal audits of where some of these monies went. So that type of thing, just like you were maintaining it for a normal income tax audit, you should maintain documentation of your expenses.
Mhm.
That is separate from documentation of your existence as a business, which you will be required to submit.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Perfect clarification. So we have another great question. We touched on it, but I want to specifically call this out. Kelley and I talked about this yesterday. So the question from Belinda: what about business owners that receive the EIDL advance? She's entitled to SBA grant, but we know that's the EIDL advance that came along with that process. Are they eligible to apply?
They are eligible to apply, but again, the expenses for which they're seeking reimbursement, if they've already received an advance through the EIDL, that would have to be entered into the system during the application process, and it will be subtracted from that total amount of expenses for which you're seeking reimbursement.
Yes, and I asked that question because you know, a lot of folks chose to just do the advance versus the proceeding to the loan, or were either denied for the loan or whatever. And so I wanted to ask that question openly because, you know, even that advance, you know, whether it proceeded to the loan or whatever, even that advance has to be entered. So, okay. Hi, Scott, I see you. So are the expenses covered under this? Wait, hold on, let me read it to myself. Scott trying to trip me up here. One of my buddies on the Small Business Council. Okay, so in essence, are businesses able to apply for expected expenses? And we talked about this yesterday too. So are we forecasting expenses in the sense of, I know that, you know, in August, September, October, or what expenses are we applying for? What can be covered?
Well, we're talking about expenses incurred as of the time of application.
Okay.
So incurred doesn't necessarily mean paid though. If you've got a bill that you've incurred and you have not yet paid it, but it was already due as of the point you applied, then that counts. But if you're thinking 2 months from now, I might have to pay some more payroll, those projected, expected, or possible expenses don't count. But it's things that have been incurred, and as an accountant would say, if it's something you would accrue, even if you haven't paid it, then those things count.
Okay, got it.
Good
Very
deal.
good. Very good. Okay. So Miss Vicky, you mentioned business expenses through application date. So let's see, business needs that dollar. What else? What else does the business need ahead of time to apply? I think we already answered that one. We're kind of backdating some of the questions. Miss Vicky, if that did not answer your question, please do feel free to put a deeper dive question in the comments. So Mr. Mike Broom, do the grant funds cover loss of rental income and renovation expenses as a result of general contractor labor disruption due to COVID? So I'm assuming some type of construction or improvements within the business. Yep. Some of the examples he has, tenants are actually behind on rent, or a contractor stopped renovating work, or loss of income from months of the unit not being rented. So it sounds like Mike is a property owner. And so that's a very good question though. Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Loss of income, of course, doesn't qualify.
There you go.
Yeah. We didn't get that. Go ahead. What'd you say again, Mr. Curtis?
Loss of income doesn't qualify. So to the extent that revenue was missed, missed revenue is not an eligible expense.
Okay.
So it's expenses incurred.
Okay. Miss Allie, we've already answered your question. However, if it wasn't deep enough, please do feel free to pop something else. All right, so Ms. Belinda asked another question. I think we covered it, but I want to specifically ask it. Can funds be used for vendor payments and payroll? Those are normal business expenses, so would they qualify? Vendor payments and payroll.
Well, of course, payroll has already been listed as one of the eligible expense categories. It would depend on what you're paying the vendor for. Whatever items that you owe that vendor for would need to be business interruption type expenses.
So that's the key word, business interruption type expenses.
Could you give an example kind of off the top of your head, Mr. Curtis, of if for that vendor purchase?
Well, if you buy something from a vendor, I think earlier you mentioned additions or enhancements to your point of sale system so you can go outside orders, that kind of stuff, or additional equipment, seals or protections to PPE to protect your cashier or whatever. Those types of, if you're paying the vendor for that type of thing, then of course they would qualify.
But if you're paying a vendor for like just your normal inventory that you're going to sell, that would not qualify.
Okay.
Very good clarification.
So these are specific, very, very specific and COVID-related expenses.
Yes.
COVID-related expenses. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
think of it as things that are paid to prevent shutdown or because of the interruption of the business, additional costs you have to incur.
Got it.
Okay. Ms. Johnston, we did already ask that one. If it wasn't covered, please do pop it in the box. So we have another good question. Can a small nonprofit organization apply for the grant?
A nonprofit?
Yes.
No, not for profit organizations are not eligible.
Okay. All right. Okay, this is a very good question. Thank you, Victor. So though EIDL advances are no longer available, which they're not, EIDL loans are still being processed literally as we speak. Those who got them in on time. So in essence, where Victor is going is that you know that you've applied, it's being processed, you don't know exactly what that final approval amount is. How does that factor into you being able to apply specifically tomorrow?
You're expecting to receive some amount, but you're not exactly sure what the amount will be.
Right.
Or you're not even sure if you've been approved. You don't know if you've been approved that I just applied.
Yeah, and a reasonable expectation would be that you're probably going to get something. You just don't know what it is. I don't know. It's possible you may not. But you have already taken steps to apply for these funds.
That's the question, yep.
Yes, so what you reasonably expect to receive is the best number you can give us, but you've already applied for the amounts. So I would assume that you reasonably expect to get the amounts. So if you've applied for them, you should expect to get them. So I would count that as reimbursements expected.
Okay. And I think that's a very good question. I think it is tricky because they're no longer doing the advances. So then if you have submitted the EIDL application, then you know that that's contingent upon, they're doing hard credit pulls and a whole bunch of other stuff. So you probably want to try to call and see of the likelihood of you being approved. But that is a very good question.
Yeah, I think at this point, we're going to have to hope that individuals will use their better judgment and operating integrity to navigate this process, because I helped someone apply yesterday and there's no indication whatsoever of whether they're going to get approved or not. But if they apply tomorrow, they won't know. And the reality of it is they could put zero and be being honest because they could get declined, or they could put $1,000 and then receive nothing. So I think, it really just depends on that one. And, we'll kind of move forward and see how that goes from there. And to be honest, because there's not really a right or wrong answer there, because if they put 1,000 and they did decline, that's $1,000 additional dollars that they could have received from the state program.
Well, that's true. And no one can predict the future exactly. So
right.
They're actually going to get.
Right. Awesome. We got one more.
Kelley, were you going to say something?
No, that's good. I'm good with it. Okay.
So Vicki has another great question, and I know, Kelley, you mentioned this yesterday, and it's a good sort of transition. So I'm going to read it word for word. Revive website mentions needing a bank account info, DBA name, business address, phone number, NAICS code, NAICS, I always pronounce that wrong, primary contact information. However, it did not mention on the website that the business expenses need to be calculated ahead of time. I realized that you cannot log out and save info. So that's one thing we talked about yesterday. So just wanted to make sure that we have read everything ready. We have everything ready before we log in to apply. Is there anything else that business owner, when they're getting ready to sit down and apply, that we haven't covered that they need to have? And again, the most important piece of that, because we have kind of gone over things to have handy, is that you won't be able to save, right, Kelley?
Yeah, and I'm looking at that FAQ right there, because it talks about that the information submitted during the application process is going to be verified and vetted against the department's records to the extent possible. So we've got it set up where we can verify pretty much a good portion of what's in that application in terms of eligibility requirements, number of employees, revenues, whether you filed your tax return. If for some reason we cannot verify that information against our business records, we may be reaching out to you for that additional documentation that you just read about. I think you might have been reading a different FAQ, but it's that same kind of information. Now, there's a possibility too that because that system is verifying information against our records while it's going through, if our records are different than what's put into the application may be denied as well. But some things will just go to manual review because we can't automatically check them against our system, and that's when we're going to be asking for additional documentation. There is a part of the application now where you're going to be asked to upload a W-9. But that's part of the application process.
And that does go to a question that I saw earlier about approvals. So can we kind of talk about, claiming the approvals of everybody on the call that they're going to get this grant? What is that approval process going to look like?
If the application is what we call auto approved, meaning that we can verify during that application process or within our system once that application is filed, all the applicable, the required eligibility, then it will be what we call auto approved. And at that point, a notice will be sent to the applicant's MAT account, an email and then a web notice as well. So I will tell you in terms of timing on that, the applications will begin to come in on Thursday at noon. The earliest you're probably going to receive a notice of an auto apply or an auto denial would be earlier the following week, if that's helpful.
Sweet.
Okay.
So, this has been phenomenal. We're definitely hitting our 12:30 mark, and I again, Curtis and Kelley, we just greatly appreciate you all coming on with us and actually taking the time to answer these questions and provide insight to all of the small business owners and ecosystem partners across the state. I've seen a lot of partners in different parts of the state, and so this has seemed to be very productive. So if we kind of had to give a rundown of the high points of what we touched today, the most important thing is to make sure that you have a MAT account or you know how to get into your MAT account. And if you don't have a MAT account, we can go to My Alabama Taxes and register, and there's a PDF form that can be used at this point. Is that correct, Ms. Kelley?
Yes, I was going to actually try to see if I could send you. I will send y'all a screenshot. If you go to the FAQs and it talks, there's one that talks about what I don't have in a MAT account. The link is in that FAQ, that answer directly to that fillable PDF.
Okay.
All right, and with the instructions.
And that's on My Alabama Taxes, and then there's a FAQ section that has that listed there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that has the actual link to the PDF.
Perfect.
And then there's also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. And then there's also that link on My Alabama Taxes that's specifically designated for the Revive Alabama Small Business Fund. So it's going to say RASB, and they'll be able to use that link as well, right?
And that's the link to the same PDF that I'm talking about. So you can go into it both ways.
Perfect.
And so from there, if I don't have one or I don't know how to get in, so if we had password issues, what was the tip to do if I don't know how to get in or my accountant can't help me to get in? What do we do?
You can contact the tax policy division. I would suggest that you use our email, taxpolicy@revenue.alabama.gov. The phones are beginning to ring off the hook, and sometimes it'll be easier for us to get back with you on an email. But we can help you with that logon information and get it to you if we have an email address already associated with the MAT account.
Run that one more time, real slow for me. Tax policies at
revenue.alabama.gov.
Got it.
Contact information is also on the main Revive Alabama webpage on our website.
Outstanding.
This
And so
tax
one,
policy.
Just
I'm
remember.
sorry, please type
Alabama are spelled out.
What?
got it.
The word
Fix
in the
it for it.
revenue and Alabama are spelled out.
Okay, got it.
I'm sorry, I didn't see what you typed. I apologize.
Talib was fixing it for me now. So she said I did something wrong because I couldn't hear it. So that's perfect. So thank you very much. We want to make sure we're getting this out, and so we can get ready to shut this down. And then once we get in, before we get in, we need to make sure that we have all of our expenses from the beginning of the pandemic, which was somewhere around the second week in March, right, when people start being affected, all the way up to present date. And then you want to look at if you received any federal funding, Paycheck Protection, PPP, PUA, unemployment, right? And then economic injury, disaster lending. And you're going to subtract, that's going to automatically be subtracted. And the remaining of unreimbursed expenses is what you'll be eligible for, up to $15,000. Is that correct?
That
Yes.
sounds good. That's correct.
Awesome. And you'll be notified, any notification that will take place is going to be back through that MAT account. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, and I think it actually will go to the email address associated with that account as well, but
Okay.
there'll be a web notice in MAT as well.
Perfect.
And you may
And
be
so-
contacted by one of our reviewers if there are questions that aren't resolved automatically. If there's a way we can clear up something and get the business approved, we'll try to do that as well. So
Okay.
we will have reviewers reaching out to people as well.
Awesome.
All right, so thank you so much, Kelley. Thank you so much, Curtis. We've gotten some great information, as Reggie said. We are going to also just put this information underneath the social media posts, the links that have been mentioned, the email address, the telephone number. Those who registered via Zoom, I will email out a recording if you missed this, because not everybody was able to join. So we'll try to turn around this very quickly and get this information back out to you so that you can take another listen again. But that's all I have. Again, thank you, Kelley. Curtis, any last minute comments? No.
I would certainly like to reiterate the comment from the beginning that we appreciate this opportunity to be on this call with you, because we like to facilitate communications between the taxpaying community and the professionals and the department.
Awesome.
We're here to serve, and we try to serve, and we want to make sure this process works as smoothly as possible, and as many people can benefit from it as possible, like it was set up to do.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so very much. And we appreciate everyone for joining. This has been phenomenal. And so again, share this. If you're in Alabama and you know somebody who's a business owner and you caught it, share it on social media. Once you get the recording through Zoom, if you register, make sure we circulate this information as much as possible. And we'll try to do whatever we can to assist through this process. So thank you all again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.